All right, coming off a disappointing 5-7 season at USC, of course, Clay Helton wants to appease the fan bases with a nice recruiting ranking, even though it means nothing on the field. But to give that indication that the program's still headed in the right direction toward 2019 and beyond, we got Matt Lauer on the line from Conquest Chronicles. It is the USC platform there on SB Nation. Matt, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, actually. How about yourself?
I'm doing just fine. And definitely appreciate you jumping on the line because we've got a lot of USC folks that want to know what's going on. And so when I don't keep up with USC, they get all over me. So I need guys like you. So with USC, I'm looking at these national recruiting ranking of 24, fourth in the Pac-12 according to 247 Sports, which isn't awful, but
Right.
they're not Arizona State. They're not UCLA. They're not Stanford even. They're USC. So we expect the best class in the Pac-12 and a top 5 to 10 class in the nation. So how is this being met by the fan base? And what is your perspective on whether the recruiting ranking means a lot or maybe not necessarily as much as we would think?
Well, right now with the fan base, a lot of them are very concerned on what's going on in the recruiting front. It's been pretty silent on the recruiting front this season, and I think you can add that with the struggles of USC this season on the field as well. Um, Typically, USC tends to finish strong in recruiting, but right now, a lot of people are concerned because the top recruits who USC would grab in certain places like Salt Lake City or in California even are now going elsewhere. I believe Kevin Thibodeau, who just committed to Oregon, typically a player who USC would be in on, and recently USC haven't even recruited him at all, or has been pretty slow in the recruiting point. But I mean, you have to hand it to Oregon. They've been recruiting very well. They picked up on their 2019 class just last year or earlier this year, actually. So they've been recruiting very well. Stanford's been recruiting very well. But for USC, considering how high they were ranked in recruiting last year, it seemed like a drop off this year. It seems like a drop off this year being number 4.
Yeah, there's no question about that. If you just go by the recruiting rankings, which is a strong indication as to how good these classes are, it's not everything. Certainly, certain coaching staffs are gifted with the ability to develop classes and move up the recruiting rankings. And
Right.
Wisconsin and Michigan State would seem to be classic examples of that. Chip Kelly did that at Oregon. Then there are other classes like the ones we've seen in Texas prior to Tom Herman that had high rankings and then they didn't perform on the field. But for the most part, you perform like the recruiting ranking for the most part. And when you dip to 24, when you were fourth last year in the nation and tops in the Pac-12, which apparently, based on the indications for 2020, USC should be able to vie for the top spot in the Pac-12. When we look at some of the top players in the class, whether it be the guys that have the best rankings or just guys that you've seen on film and heard something about that you really like, who would be those guys?
One guy who I'm really looking forward to, and I know he didn't play due to a torn ACL, but it's Max Williams. USC lost a lot in the secondary department. They're losing guys to graduation, they're losing guys to transfers, and not to mention you had Talanoa Hufanga and Isaiah Polamao who was out with injuries. So with him, I think he's a guy who can make an immediate impact once he gets healthy. He's a guy who could possibly see playing time early on with the amount of depth at USC right now at in that position. Another guy who a lot of people seem to be high on is Jason Rodriguez, who just committed as well, who just signed his letter of intent. Huge USC commit all the way through. I think he's a guy who could push for a starting spot come day one once he steps foot on campus.
Yeah, so obviously the Pac-12 has been down in recent years. USC is the flagship uh, program of the Pac-12, despite not necessarily being the best program right now. That's, I would say, Washington and Oregon, obviously having the best recruiting year, but USC has the most cachet. Uh, your thoughts about Clay Helton? Obviously, he survived this season. I would think that next season is going to be the big audition. That if he hits whatever those predetermined marks are of wins or a Pac-12 South title, whatever that needs to be, that Clay Helton probably is on thin ice.
Yeah, he is on thin ice right now. You saw what Lynn Swan said, that Helton is their head coach moving forward for 2019 and moving forward. But if USC struggles out the gate, which is a realistic possibility because of the first 4 to 5 games, they have some tough games. So if they struggle out the gate, and you have Kliff Kingsbury, who they just hired on staff, a head coach with experience, if they struggle, they could pull the trigger on letting him go and having Kingsbury as the interim and going, okay, Cliff, let's see what you can do with this team. Let's see what you can do moving forward. But I think that was also a huge reason why USC's recruiting has been down as well, is because of the uncertainty with Clay Helton on if he's going to be there, if he's going to be fired. Right now, that's still an uncertainty despite the coaching changes they've made. His status is still up in the air because USC is one bad start away from Helton being jobless.
No question. You mentioned Kliff Kingsbury, not necessarily the most successful run at Texas Tech, but he has run a major program. Did get to bowl games there occasionally, but a lot of 5-win seasons there for Kingsbury, and they finally let him go. So here's a guy that has a reputation for running a certain kind of offense that in this day and age, I don't think there's a huge departure from what he did at Texas Tech and what USC does, even though it's more of a pro style set. But basically, the spread formation and the RPOs have made its way into everybody's offense to a certain extent. So, what are your thoughts about the hire of Kingsbury?
I thought it was an outstanding hire. It was a home run hire for USC, and that's what they needed. USC's offense struggled last year mightily, and I believe they were ranked 90th in scoring, which that was up there with Oregon State. With USC and the talent they have, you can't have that. And it seemed like USC lacked an identity. But when USC showed some of the air raid tendencies, they were moving the ball with ease. They were actually having a good time moving the ball, getting the ball out of JT Daniels' hands, making quick passes where he don't have to hold on to it as long and make those long reads. And I think with Kingsbury, he'll bring that to USC along with the weapons that USC has. Not to mention Kingsbury's also the quarterback coach. So we've seen what he's done at Texas Tech while he was head coach there. We've seen what he's done with Johnny Manziel under when he was the offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. We've seen what he's done with Case Keenum at Houston when Kingsbury was coaching at Houston. So they need somebody who can develop quarterbacks, who can develop and who can help an offense, put points on the board, move the ball. Kingsbury's that guy, and I think it was an outstanding hire for USC and a well-needed one at that too.
We're on the line with Matt Lauer. You can catch him and the rest of the crew there at Conquest Chronicles, the SB Nation platform for USC athletics. It's National Signing Day. Of course, we're accustomed to that being the first Wednesday of February, and that still exists. But we went through this process for the first time last year of the early signing period, and it took over with about close to 80% of the Power 5 players being signed in December and roughly 220 of the top 300 players. So this is where most of the players are going to sign here in the next 2 to 3 days. It's about 1:30 on the West Coast right now. Matt, between now and when Clay Helton addresses the media a little bit later. Do you expect anything to turn USC's way? Are there any guys out there that have USC on the short list?
There should be about two more players who are committing in about, I want to say, 2 hours, close to 2 hours. So we could expect that Drake Jackson, excuse me, he was supposed to commit at 3. He ended up committing a little bit earlier, just a few minutes ago, committed to USC. Um, but I think USC could get one more guy. They could get one more commit to come early on. Stephon Wright right now, a lot of people have him possibly going to Alabama. USC is still in the running for him. He commits at 3, so it's possible that he could commit to USC. If he does, then that will be huge for the Trojans to end the day with the strong finish. And then for the rest, which you have Brew McCoy and Kyle Ford, who are all guys and Chris Steele, who are all gonna commit on during the Army All-American game. Things like that could turn USC's way, and you could see them rise in the rankings and in recruiting.
All right, some good stuff from Matt Lauer. Join him and the rest of the staff there at Conquest Chronicles, breaking down USC football for us. Matt, I appreciate you stopping by. I know you've had a long day of trying to track all these guys and figure out who's signing and get some stories written up.
Oh yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.